It was a crisp autumn evening when I returned home to find my privacy hedges, 6 years of meticulous care, reduced to jagged stumps. My heart sank as I stepped out of my car, the cold air biting at my skin. The once lush, green barrier that shielded my home from prying eyes was now a mangled mess, barely 3 feet tall. My hands trembled as I picked up the yellow notice taped to my front door. Vegetation violation corrected. $750 landscaping fee applied to your account. Willow Creek HOA. I clenched my fists, the paper crumpling in my grip. This wasn't just about the hedges. This was personal. I had measured those hedges every Saturday morning, ensuring they were exactly 6.5 feet tall, well within the HOA's 7-foot limit. Someone had trespassed on my property and destroyed something I had worked so hard to cultivate. And for what? A $750 fine? Through the new gaps in my once private yard, I could see Diane Reynolds across the street, pretending to water her roses. She had always hated my hedges, complaining at every neighborhood meeting that they blocked her view. Her smirk told me everything I needed to know. She had something to do with this. I stormed inside and dialed the HOA office. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Willow Creek Gardens HOA. This is Margaret speaking. Margaret, this is Jackson Taylor from 243 Magnolia Drive. I just got home to find my hedges butchered and a $750 fine on my door. I want to know who authorized this and why. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing on a keyboard. Yes, Mr. Taylor. We received several complaints about visibility issues with your hedges. The board voted on it last Thursday. Didn't you read the community email? What email? I never received any notice. And my hedges were within regulation height. I measure them every week. Margaret's voice turned cold. The board determined they exceeded height restrictions and blocked sight lines at the corner. The decision was unanimous. That's impossible. I want to speak to Karen Wilson. Right now. The board president is unavailable. You can file a formal appeal, but the landscaping fee stands. The work has already been done. I hung up, my blood boiling. This wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. They couldn't enter my property without proper notice. I grabbed my camera and went outside to document the damage. As I photographed the remains of my hedges, a sleek black SUV slowed in front of my house. Karen Wilson, the HOA board president, rolled down her window. Her perfect blonde bob didn't move as she tilted her head. Landscaping looks much better now, Jackson. The whole neighborhood thanks you for finally complying with regulations. I was already in compliance, Karen. You know that. This was trespassing and destruction of property. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. The board has the authority to remedy violations after proper notification. Check your email next time. She started to roll up her window, but I wasn't done. You targeted me specifically, just like you did to the Montgomerys last month with their fence. Her window stopped halfway. Be careful with accusations, Jackson. This community runs on rules and respect. Some people just have trouble with both. The SUV pulled away, leaving me seething on my lawn. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it to find a job confirmation for next Monday, my new position as the financial auditor for Willow Creek Gardens HOA. The board had just approved my hiring last week, but the paperwork wouldn't reach Karen until tomorrow. They had no idea I'd been given full access to their accounts, spending records, and decision logs for the past 5 years. I smiled for the first time since coming home. Karen Wilson thought she had all the power, but she had just handed me the keys to her kingdom. The next morning, I arrived at the county records office the moment it opened. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I requested all property boundary maps and easement records for Willow Creek Gardens. Doing some home improvements? She asked, sliding the heavy binder across the counter. More like solving a mystery, I replied, opening to my street section. Someone cut down my hedges yesterday without permission. I need to know if they had any legal right to be on my land. The maps confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had 0 easement rights to my property beyond the standard utility access points, which were nowhere near my hedges. What they did was straight-up trespassing. While at the records office, I noticed something else. The landscaping company listed on my violation notice, Elite Green Solutions, had filed business registration paperwork just 3 months ago. The owner's name caught my eye, Michael Wilson, Karen's brother-in-law. I photographed everything with my phone and headed to my next stop, Diane Reynolds' house. Her car was in the driveway, and I knew she'd be home, watching her morning shows. I knocked firmly. When Diane opened the door, her smile dropped. "Jackson, what a surprise." "Good morning, Diane. Those sprinklers are looking mighty active for a drought restriction day." She glanced nervously at her yard, where sprinklers were indeed running despite the county's odd-even water restrictions. "Just a quick sprinkle for the new flowers. Funny how some violations get overlooked while others get immediate action," I said. "Like my hedges that were cut yesterday. I wonder if you know anything about the complaints the HOA mentioned." Diane's face flushed. "Well, those hedges were blocking the view of the intersection. Safety hazard. That's interesting, since my property isn't on an intersection. It's mid-block, and the sightline maps I just checked at the county office show no visibility issues." She shifted uncomfortably. Karen said. "Karen said what?" Diane bit her lip. "Look, I mentioned at the garden club that your hedges made it hard for me to see if suspicious people were hanging around the neighborhood. Karen said she'd take care of it, without any formal complaint process or notification to me. That's against HOA bylaws. You should talk to Karen about that." Diane started to close her door. "Oh, I will. By the way, when did they start waiving water restriction violations for garden club members?" Her door shut without another word. I spent the next 3 hours walking the neighborhood with my phone camera, documenting every single rule violation I could find. Karen's oversized gazebo that exceeded structure height limitations. Rob Johnson's unpermitted fence staining. The Bradford's commercial vehicles parked in their driveway overnight. All violations that belonged to board members or their friends, all mysteriously overlooked. As I photographed Karen's non-regulation mailbox, a familiar black SUV pulled up beside me. "Taking up a new hobby, Jackson?" Karen's voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were cold as ice. "Just admiring the neighborhood," I replied calmly. "Lots of interesting exceptions to the rules around here. Neighbors who work together tend to find reasonable compromises," she said. "Those who cause trouble tend to face more scrutiny." "Is that a threat, Karen?" "Just an observation from 15 years running this community. The board meeting is tonight. Feel free to file your complaint. We have a special form for chronic complainers." As she drove away, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from the HOA management company, confirming my start date for Monday and attaching preliminary account access credentials, as requested by Thomas Garcia. Thomas was the only board member who consistently challenged Karen's decisions. I logged in immediately from my phone, curiosity burning. The system gave limited weekend access, but enough to see one crucial piece of information. Payments to landscaping vendors had tripled in the past year, with Elite Green Solutions receiving over $200,000 for emergency vegetation management. My hedge removal $200,000 for emergency vegetation management. My hedge removal $1,500 with $750 $750 paid from HOA funds. The sound of a car door closing made me look up. Thomas Garcia was walking toward me, looking nervously over his shoulder. "Jackson, we need to talk," he said quietly. "But not here. Meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes. Table near the duck pond." At the park, Thomas handed me a coffee and got straight to the point. "Karen is planning something big. Yesterday's emergency meeting wasn't on the books. No minutes, no records." "About my hedges?" I asked. "Your hedges were just the beginning. They're using beautification and safety to justify a massive neighborhood renovation project. Elite Green Solutions would get the entire contract, $1.2 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's almost all our reserve funds." Thomas nodded grimly. "The vote is happening at next week's meeting. They need to move fast because their last quarterly financial review had some questions about spending patterns." "Let me guess, the review where they hired a new auditor?" "Exactly. They don't know it's you yet. Karen just knows they needed someone with credentials to satisfy the bank's requirements for their loan application." I leaned back, mind racing. "So they're going to spend all our reserves, then take out a loan, all funneled through Karen's brother-in-law's company." "That's my guess, but I can't prove it, and I'm just one vote against 6. I showed him the photos I'd taken at the county office. "You might not be able to prove it, but starting Monday, I can access everything." Thomas's eyes widened. Be careful, Jackson. The last person who challenged Karen's authority found their job mysteriously at risk after she called their employer about community concerns. I'm not afraid of Karen, I said. You should be. Thomas replied, looking over my shoulder. She's watching us right now. I turned to see Karen's black SUV parked across the pond, her silhouette visible through the windshield. What would she do when she discovered who the new HOA auditor really was? Monday morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase filled with evidence about my hedges, and drove to the HOA office. The glass door slid open as I stepped into the air-conditioned building for the first time as an employee, not a frustrated resident. Margaret looked up from her computer, her usual stern expression melting into shock when I flashed my new security badge. Mr. Taylor? What are you doing here? Her fingers froze over her keyboard. Starting my new job, Margaret. I'm the financial auditor Willow Creek, HOA hired last month. I savored the way her mouth dropped open. But your complaint about the hedges. I didn't realize. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Now, I'll need complete access to all financial records from the past 5 years. Let's start with landscaping expenditures, please. Margaret's hands trembled as she logged me into the system. Karen usually handles those files personally. Well, today I'll be handling them. That's what I was hired to do. For the next 4 hours, I dove into spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements. What I found made my blood boil. Elite Green Solutions, the company that destroyed my hedges, appeared in payment records dating back 3 years. Their rates were outrageous. 1. 200 per hedge when Other Company S charged 1. 200 per hedge when Other Company S charged 500. I dug deeper. Who owned Elite Green Solutions? A quick business registry search revealed Matthew Wilson as the owner. Wilson, Karen's last name. Could it be? I called a friend who worked at the county clerk's office. Hey, Sammy. Need a quick favor. Can you tell me if Matthew Wilson is related to Karen Wilson from Willow Creek? 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. Matthew is married to Karen's sister. They share a vacation home in Palm Springs. My hands shook as I printed key documents. Karen had been funneling HOA money to her brother-in-law's company for years. Last year alone, they received $216,700 for emergency vegetation management across the community. But it got worse. I found a pattern in violation notices. Homes belonging to board members and their friends never received fines, while others faced immediate penalties for the smallest issues. My $750 fine wasn't unusual. Dozens of residents had similar charges, often for violations that didn't exist according to HOA rules. I created a map of the neighborhood, marking properties with violations and their connections to board members. The pattern was clear as day, selective enforcement based on personal relationships. At 4:30 p.m., I heard Karen's voice in the hallway. I quickly gathered my papers and slipped out the back door. I needed time to organize my findings before confronting her. The next morning, loud banging on my front door jolted me awake at 6:15 a.m. I peered through the blinds to see a bulldozer rumbling in front of my house. Karen stood in my yard, wearing a bright yellow safety vest, pointing and giving orders to a work crew. I rushed outside, still in my pajamas and slippers. Stop right now? What's happening on my property? Karen turned with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good morning, Jackson. We're conducting an emergency pipe inspection. Our sensors detected a major water leak under your front yard, wasting community resources. That's impossible. I had my plumbing checked last month, I said, stepping between her and the nervous-looking workers. You can't just show up and start digging. Karen pulled a paper from her clipboard. Actually, I can. This emergency work order gives us full access. See these signatures? All perfectly legal. I snatched the paper and examined it. The document looked official, but something felt wrong. You need proper notice for this kind of work. Not for emergencies, Karen said, grabbing the paper back. Now, please step aside, or I'll be forced to call the police for interfering with critical infrastructure repair. My neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, came out of her house, coffee in hand. Jackson, everything okay? Soon, other neighbors appeared, curious about the commotion. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling Thomas. Karen smirked. Call whoever you want. This is happening. While my phone rang, I noticed something odd about the work crew. They weren't wearing the usual utility company uniforms. just generic work clothes. And their truck had a magnetic sign that looked freshly applied. Thomas arrived 10 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt. He studied the work order while Karen tapped her foot impatiently. "This authorization requires 3 board signatures," Thomas said. "I only see yours and Robert's." "Who's the third?" Karen pointed to a scribble at the bottom. "Diane signed as acting secretary." "That's not how it works," Thomas said. "Diane isn't the secretary, and emergency votes require notifying all board members, including me." More neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "This is pure revenge for last night's meeting. Karen's trying to tear up my yard before the forensic accountants arrive tomorrow." Phones came out as people started recording. Karen's face reddened. "This is a legitimate emergency. The leak could damage the foundation of nearby homes." I crossed my arms. "Then where's the water company? Where's the leak detection equipment? Where's the official notice to dig?" "I don't need to explain board decisions to you," Karen snapped, losing her cool. "Either move aside or face the consequences." One of the workers approached Karen, looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if this isn't properly authorized, we could lose our licenses." Karen whirled on him. "You're being paid to do a job, not ask questions." I stepped forward. "Actually, I have questions too. Like, why is this crew from Johnson Brothers Excavation when our HOA contracts exclusively with city utilities for infrastructure?" I pointed to their magnetic door sign. "And why does your business license number not match any registered company in this county?" The crew looked at each other nervously. One whispered to the others, and they began packing up their marking flags. "Where do you think you're going?" Karen yelled. "I'm paying you good money." The crew leader shook his head. "Sorry, lady. We didn't sign up for this. You said this was all approved." Just then, 2 news vans turned onto our street, cameras already rolling. Thomas smiled at my surprised look. "I called them last night after the meeting. Thought they might be interested in our HOA drama." Karen's face drained of color as she saw the reporters heading our way. She fumbled for her car keys. "This isn't over, Jackson," she hissed. "Nobody challenges me and gets away with it." "You started this war when you cut down my hedges," I replied calmly. "But I'm going to finish it." As Karen sped away in her SUV, a reporter approached with a microphone. "Sir, we received a tip about possible HOA corruption in Willow Creek Gardens. Can you tell us what's happening here today?" I looked directly into the camera. "I'm about to show you how one woman turned our neighborhood into her personal kingdom, and how we're taking it back." The news segment went viral. Within days, reporters were digging into the HOA's finances, uncovering a web of corruption that extended far beyond my hedges. Karen's carefully built empire crumbled as more residents came forward with stories of selective enforcement and inflated fees. The forensic accountants found evidence of over $400,000 in misappropriated funds, funneled through Elite Green Solutions and other shell companies. Karen, along with 3 other board members, was arrested on charges of fraud and financial misconduct. At a special meeting of the HOA, Thomas was elected as the new board president. He immediately implemented reforms to increase transparency and accountability. The reserve fund was replenished, and every homeowner who had been unfairly fined received a refund, with interest. As for me, I was invited to join a county task force to investigate HOA fraud across the region. It was a small victory, but one that felt deeply personal. One evening, as I stood in my front yard, I noticed tiny green shoots pushing up where my hedges had once stood. I smiled, knowing that, like my hedges, the neighborhood would grow back stronger than ever. Months later, as the sun set over Willow Creek Gardens, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced since moving here. We had faced a bully together and won. The neighborhood was no longer a collection of houses ruled by fear and favoritism. It was a community. A car slowed as it passed my house. The driver rolled down the window. It was a woman I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm looking at a house for sale on Maple Street. Is this a good neighborhood to live in?" Thomas and I exchanged glances and smiled. "It is now," I answered. "It really is." The arrest of Karen Wilson and her accomplices sent shockwaves through Willow Creek Gardens. The neighborhood, once ruled by fear and favoritism, was now buzzing with a newfound sense of hope and unity. Thomas Garcia, the new HOA board president, wasted no time in implementing reforms to ensure transparency and accountability. The reserve fund was replenished, and every homeowner who had been unfairly fined received a refund, with interest. But as the dust settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. Karen's arrest was just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper I dug into the HOA's finances, the more I realized that her corruption extended far beyond our neighborhood. Elite Green Solutions, the landscaping company owned by Karen's brother-in-law, had contracts with several other HOAs across the county, and Karen had served as a consultant for many of them. One evening, as I sat in my living room reviewing documents, my phone buzzed. It was Thomas. "Jackson, we need to talk. Can you come to the HOA office tomorrow morning? There's something you need to see." The next morning, I arrived at the HOA office to find Thomas waiting for me. He led me to a small conference room where a stack of files was spread across the table. "We've been going through Karen's emails and financial records," Thomas explained, "and we found something disturbing." He handed me a folder labeled Elite Green Solutions, External Contracts. Inside were invoices and contracts for landscaping services with several other HOAs. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars funneled through Elite Green Solutions and other shell companies. Karen wasn't just stealing from us, Thomas said. She was running a network of corruption that spanned multiple neighborhoods. I flipped through the documents, my mind racing. We need to take this to the county task force. If Karen was involved in this, there's no telling how far it goes. Thomas nodded. I've already scheduled a meeting with the district attorney. But we need more evidence. We need to connect the dots between Karen and these other HOAs. Later that day, I received an unexpected visitor. Diane Reynolds stood on my doorstep, looking nervous and hesitant. "Jackson, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I invited her in, curious about what she had to say. Diane had been one of Karen's closest allies, but since Karen's arrest, she had kept a low profile. "I know I made mistakes," Diane began, tears welling up in her eyes. "I trusted Karen, and I didn't see what she was doing until it was too late. But I want to make things right." She handed me a USB drive. "This has everything. Emails, financial records, even recordings of Karen's meetings. I was too scared to come forward before, but now, I need to do the right thing." I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and began reviewing the files. What I found was explosive, detailed records of Karen's dealings with other HOAs, kickbacks, and even evidence of bribery. "Diane, this is huge," I said. "Thank you for coming forward." She nodded, wiping away tears. "I just hope it's enough to make up for what I've done." With the new evidence in hand, I met with the county task force to present our findings. The district attorney was shocked by the scope of Karen's corruption and immediately launched an investigation into the other HOAs involved. As the investigation unfolded, more whistleblowers came forward, each adding another piece to the puzzle. It became clear that Karen had been running a sophisticated operation, using her position as an HOA consultant to funnel money into her own pockets. The task force worked tirelessly, uncovering millions of dollars in misappropriated funds and bringing charges against several other HOA board members and contractors. The case made headlines, and the public outcry led to calls for stricter regulations and oversight of HOAs. Months later, the trial of Karen Wilson and her co-conspirators began. The courtroom was packed with residents from Willow Creek Gardens and other affected neighborhoods. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution presented a compelling case. Karen, once the untouchable queen of Willow Creek, sat stoically as the charges were read. But as the trial progressed, her facade began to crack. Witness after witness testified against her, detailing her schemes and the damage she had caused. In the end, Karen was found guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a stark contrast to the life of luxury she had once enjoyed. The other defendants received similar sentences, and the court ordered the restitution of millions of dollars to the affected HOAs. It was a victory for justice, but it came at a cost. The damage to the neighborhoods and the trust of the residents would take years to repair. Chapter 13, A New Dawn. With Karen behind bars and the corrupt network dismantled, Willow Creek Gardens began to heal. Thomas and the new board worked tirelessly to rebuild the community's finances and restore trust. They implemented new policies to ensure transparency and accountability, and they encouraged residents to get involved in the decision-making process. I continued to work with the county task force, helping to draft new regulations to prevent future corruption. It was a challenging but rewarding experience, and I felt a sense of purpose knowing that I was making a difference. One evening, as I stood in my front yard, I noticed the tiny green shoots of my new hedges pushing through the soil. They were still small, but they were growing, just like the neighborhood. Thomas joined me, a smile on his face. It's been a long road, but we're finally on the right path. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride. We've come a long way, and we're not done yet. As the sun set over Willow Creek Gardens, I knew that the worst was behind us. The neighborhood was no longer a collection of houses ruled by fear and favoritism. It was a community. And together, we had proven that even the deepest roots of corruption could be pulled out, making way for new growth and a brighter future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.